Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Taide, and today we are talking to Daniel Solomon. Daniel is a serial entrepreneur and a startup builder, including Irogo, UAE's first ugly food produce service that aims to eliminate food waste by automating discounts. Previously, Daniel was the CEO and founder of Iro, a digital agency serving global brands such as PwC and Toyota. He also held positions at Publicis Sapiens and has an MBA from University of Liverpool. Hi, Daniel. It's great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm well, Maria. Thanks for having me on Future Hacker. Happy to also learn more about why Future Hacker as a title.
Future hackers are people like you, as we're just talking to people that are hacking our way through the future to get best of technology, innovation, and knowledge for everybody out there, just to make sure we're going to a more sustainable future and inclusive, hopefully, right? And we're definitely talking about that. But Daniel, you're currently based in Dubai, right? You're from Nigeria. You started in the corporate world. You moved to entrepreneurship focused on impact business. So, I'd love to begin by having you telling our listeners about your journey, what made you arrive where you are today. Can we begin like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a pleasure again to be on the podcast. Future Hacker, I love the title, and that's the reason why I asked. I love the way you were able to say, we're creating a more sustainable world. And this is something that I find really interesting lately. Speaking about my background, I've been in Dubai for almost a decade. Before that, I worked in Publicis Sapiens, and after that, I went to a startup where we're using augmented reality to create impressive digital enterprise project for real estate clients. And after that, I went to start up an agency, leveraging on my experience and background. And I served Fortune 500 companies, including Ability Jamil Group, who owns the Toyota, Lexus, Virgin Mobile, PwC, and so on. I'm originally Nigerian, and this is where I call home. Obviously, Dubai has been home for almost a decade, but being able to cross between both worlds, I'm able to see things, I guess, from two different angles, which basically leads me to my current venture that I'm currently building. So it's a pleasure to sit with you, and I really find your podcast really interesting.
Thank you so much, Daniel. You know what? So I'm curious, and for sure, your origins has something to do with that. So, what made you go to the food waste segment?
We all love food. I'm joking. I wouldn't say that's passion. I think being lucky enough to travel around the world, calling Dubai home for almost a decade. When I had an office in Lagos for my first company, and also in Odessa in Ukraine, where we had the back offices, a theme that always comes into mind is, we need to do more by reaching out to people who are not as fortunate as us. And the first thing I did in my first company was to train people on how to become, programmers, so they could leverage their skills and not be dependent on, the infrastructure of, the country that they're in. Especially, when we take Nigeria as a case, a lot of people are individual entrepreneurs. They need to be able to make money for themselves because you don't have that infrastructure that different parts of the world had. So we started training people so they could become, programmers. They could offer their skills on different platforms, as a gig economic worker. And we did that for a while. And after a while, I keep asking myself, I can't do this at scale. I can't train 2 million people. I needed to do something that is a lot more impactful. And the only team that I can really connect with is inequality. Because when I go to Lagos, in different parts of Nigeria, or even in Ukraine, in Odessa, people will be like, can you please give me money? When you ask them what do you need to use the money for, they always tell you, I need to use the money to buy food, specifically in Nigeria. And, when people ask you for money that is less than 50 cents, and, you give people, money when you can. This is what a lot of us do. But when I come back to Dubai, it's a different case, right? You find people throw a lot of food away. Companies throw a lot of food away. We're talking about, food waste that occurs during Ramadan. We're talking about those brunches that we go to, which we all enjoy and we go to. But the problem is, I keep thinking, imagine taking all this food and just packing them and, sending them to somebody, who can afford food in Nigeria or in different parts of the world. And this is where the idea came about. And obviously, as we started doing more research, we found out that, food waste is not just an inequality issue, it's also an environmental issue. And that's the more reason why I needed to do something, to use my, background and experience in tech to really use technology to address the issues of food waste and food loss, from a environmental, economical, and, social point of view. And that's when the whole idea of Erogo came about. Erogo is a platform that eliminates food waste by automating discounts, working with local farmers and wholesalers to really fight food loss, especially rediverting food that are being wasted or would be wasted if, they're not rediverted. They'll go to the landfill, reclaiming the resources and, that went into making this food. And that's what we've been doing, I think, for the past couple of months that we've launched here in Dubai. And we're fighting, food waste from an environmental point of view, and to double down on where we started from, which is inequality. For every box we deliver, we're actually feeding 2 people in different parts of the world with our friends that share the meal.
That's really great, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing. When I was researching, for our conversation, and when talking about food waste, those numbers are shocking, right? So I read that depending on the region, more than 40% of the food available is lost or wasted. I think it's in the US. And as much as we do produce more food per person than we ever, more than 720 million people in the world faced hunger back in 2020. And there's more. So I read this report from the United Nations of, the Food and Agriculture Agency report called Food Wastage, Footprint and Climate Change. If we counted food waste as a country in terms of its carbon output, then it would be the 3rd largest emitter of CO2 after China and the US. So the numbers are really shocking. And you are, deep into this industry. So what do you believe are the main reasons for such an alarming scenario? So you mentioned some specific cases in Dubai that, we go to an event, we go to a brunch, and usually this food just gets wasted. But I believe there's also a huge education problem and logistic issues. So how would you name the biggest challenges on that?
I would say, first, the numbers are staggering, right? But the whole food system is broken. And without going into numbers, we just need to look at it, from the outside point of view, that, from the time that a food is being produced to the time it gets on the table, there's substantially a lot of waste that's basically occurred. And some of those issues that we don't even think about, it's not even the logistic issue. It's the small things like the promotions, that we have in stores, where we as consumers, the marketer is telling us we buy one, we get one free, and we buy those things that we don't need, right? So if you're just looking at it from an outside point of view. Now, in terms of the broken supply chain issues, you do have people who waste a lot of food, or we have a lot of food loss due to, the superficial defects, which are the ugly problems, items that are too big, they're too small, or, they just look ugly, but they're perfectly good food. So what happens is those farmers who have a produce, they can't sell an item because there's different standards that basically said particular food should not be sold, or supermarket won't get those particular food. Now, those farmers would have to do some sort of sorting to ensure that some produce are being, directed to the right people. And what happens to those items that are too big or too small? They get wasted. And this is very, very shocking. Now, when you look at different areas that you also have food loss in the broken supply chain, is labeling. You have packaging issues, you have expiring dates, Best Buy, people people not understanding it different, which when we start talking about education, it's one of the biggest contributors. As we as individuals, first of all, we're no more connected to food. So we don't pick up a food to smell them, to feel them before we actually deem them as not food that is edible. We rely so much on those labels, and those labels sometimes they're not a real source of information. Of course, they're very important to protect people who don't know anything about food when it comes to aspiring or best before, but lack of standardization is also a main contributor. So I would like to say that all of these big issues that definitely needs to be addressed, from the customer education to, the industry standards and the policy makers to standardize how informations are being put together on food labels. And you also have the issue of really making sure that people understand that, because a food has a particular shape or a size, doesn't deem it a food that, shouldn't be bought in a supermarket. So we all have to work together, not in this silos, to be able to communicate with each other to ensure that, perfectly good food are not being lost, whether during production, during transportation, during storage, or just for superficial reasons.
Yeah, so I do understand that, and it came up a lot in the research I was doing. So actually, it's good news and bad news on the same time, right? As much as there's a lot of opportunities for improvement, some of them should be really easy. It's not that it requires such an advancement in technology, but on the same time, it's changing people's behavior, which is more long-term, right? And I hope we are going to be able to be working on the educational side of our children, so it's just something that becomes a habit, right? I'm curious, so I've watched this session with you during this event for Go Food session, and I heard a couple of times the phrase recycling is too late. And I think that here in Brazil, we're in such an early stage when it comes to food waste education. And we're still just, talking about recycling. We rarely hear what comes all the way before that. So could you just comment on this phrase, recycling is just too late already?
Yeah, when we talk about food waste and food loss, I think a lot of time, we talk about food waste in general. And what happens then is, people don't understand what is food loss. And you're very right that the misalignment between those words is also a contributor, because yes, the end of the funnel, if you focus so much on it, it's too late. And when I mean the end of the funnel is when you wait for a food to be wasted, and then you're doing something with that food that has been wasted, then, it's already too late. What we want to be doing is completely eliminating food waste and preventing food waste. This is where food loss comes into action, that before a food gets to a point where it's been wasted, either because of the size, the way it looks, whether it's ugly, it's too big or too small, or because, a farmer has a lot of produce that he cannot sell because maybe he just produced too much, or because there's a change in demand. There needs to be something that happens on those lines, because that's when you still have good food that you could, really find new value for them and ensure that they don't go into the waste where they could become a major greenhouse gas emitter when it lands in the landfill. And that's why it's very important to really focus on the early stage without getting to the recycling side of things, while, the recycling, which, the waste side of things still makes it's still a lot of opportunities there, because rather than it just ending in a landfill, those wastes, can still be converted into some new value. For instance, when we talk about composting, you don't have to wait for produce to get to that stage, but also in the house, when you have an item that you can use, instead of just throwing them away, you need to start finding new value for them on the waste. So I think it's what you're saying is there's a lot of value on every value chain, but what is very important is to stay at the top of the funnel, just to ensure that waste is being prevented, or food is being prevented before it goes into that loss circle. And if you cannot capture the value at the loss point of view, then one needs to start looking into other avenues, at the end of the channel, which is when we talk about recycling. So you're very right. I think it falls down into that education on different parts of the world, us understanding the different areas the food is being lost and how can we capture value before it gets to the point where it's been recycled or the end of the funnel, which is still very important to capture value there, because you could also use food to convert them into different kind of value for individuals. But since we're talking about perfectly good food, when you started, you talked about there's a lot of people, over 800 million people, who will go to bed without a meal. So those food, if redistributed, will be able to reach a lot of other people. And that's why it's important. Food should be converted into economical and also a social value before it's basically being wasted.
Yeah, makes sense. So Daniel, let's talk about your startup. So I think I pronounced it wrong. It's HeroGo. How do you pronounce it?
That's correct, HeroGo.
So just tell us exactly what you guys do. What were the main challenges you faced? So you mentioned about the problem of the food, like how people are just not purchasing them, and what you're doing regarding that. So just give us a brief background, please.
So HeroGo is a company that, eliminates food waste, working with local farmers to reclaim ugly produce. Normally they won't make it to the shelf because of their shape, their size, or due to excess produce. So you do have a lot of items that, a farmer or a wholesaler would have, they can't sell because, it just has a lot of them, or due to changing demand. So what we're doing here is to, work with local farmers, because when you work with local farmers, you're promoting seasonality. You're also promoting, not just only seasonality, farm to fork, so people are able to eat healthy food. And this is
Future Hacker, Life, Path, Future,
which is very important. And also, the UAE is very unique. You still have some food that are being imported. What we do is to work with wholesalers and importers to take those produce they can't sell due to changing demand. And what we do really simply is to find new value for those produce, helping consumers reduce their weekly grocery shopping by subscribing to a service on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, which is delivered to them. And in doing so, everybody wins. We call it a win-win, where the consumer reduces the grocery bill, the wholesalers or the farmer find new value for produce that normally would be wasted, or at the end of the day, you're diverting food that might end up in the landfill, which means that you're helping reclaim value and reducing greenhouse gas emission, and also reclaiming water that went into making food. So that's what what we do, and we don't stop there. We believe that it's very important that all the parties that are involved really understand the impacts that they're making and what they're contributing. And this is where we work to also continue to provide insights into all the parties who are involved in the value system today, including the consumers, the local farmers or the importers, and at the end of the day, for them to see the good that they are doing, for the planet and also for people who don't have access to a good food.
And how is AI playing a role in here? Because that year aims to reduce food waste by automating discounts using AI. So which role does it play?
Without going into lots of detail, this is a predictive model that we're basically currently continuing to work on, where we're working with not just the farmers but also the food producers. Without getting into much details, I think this is where it brings the value to the farmers, the food producers, to be able to really understand what to produce at a particular time, rather than overproducing what people will need. So right in that particular sense, you're in the predictive phase, you're helping them understand and giving insights before you get to that stage of actually producing the food, this is where you're eliminating waste without it being produced, because that's the major issue, right? How do you ensure that you eliminate food loss and food waste rather than basically wait till the end of food is being produced and then it gets wasted?
Yeah, so basically producing on demand, right? It makes complete sense. So just curious about it. Do you ever consider getting into the meal production space, like using the ugly foods to make soups or juices, or having partners like companies like Hello Chef to cover the B2B side?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunities. We continue to work with our B2B customers, different customers today, who are basically, the most important thing is to make sure that we direct as many food to different partners at scale as much as possible, to also help restaurants, offices, hotels reduce their monthly or their weekly grocery shopping, amongst other food staples.
And so, what's next? What's the next big plan? If you can share, of course. What's next for Irogo?
I think the next thing is, when we talk about food waste and food loss, it's such a big issue, and there's a lot of opportunities. The universe is big when it comes to that, but most importantly, 80% of greenhouse gas emission that we have in the world is coming from food waste. And if you equate that to the global road transportation emission, which is, that's about 87% of global road transportation emissions. So you must see that when we're looking at a more sustainable world, we need to really actively continue to look at food waste and how to address food that's been wasted and food loss as a top priority, given by 2050, the world population is going to double. And when we're talking about food waste, it's connected to food security. So in terms of what's big for us, I think, is us continuing to improve our technologies, us continuing to find new partners who are joining the movement, including the customers, businesses, to really reduce food waste year on year by more than 170,000 tons. This would go a long way when you're looking at the water that you've saved, the total number of cubic liters, and also the CO2e emission, which is basically being released to the atmosphere when food is being wasted. And I think that's basically what lies ahead, is finding ways to really prevent being, a company that prevents food being wasted, rather than getting into, just redirecting, because it might be too late, like you said. So there's a lot of opportunities. There's also a lot of challenges, because one has to start looking at, ways that you could get every party involved, including, the policymakers, the customers, the retail stores, and it's just like a full chain that has to be looked at. And, we as a company, as a startup, obviously we're starting here, but we need to get everybody involved as much as possible to really reclaim all this food that are at risk of basically being lost, and they continue to be, lost and wasted when wasting valuable resources such as water that went into making the food. Also we're talking about reclaimed carbon, anytime we're talking about food and food waste. So those are like what the future, definitely when we look at the future, is how much can we capture all of this value that normally has been wasted from an economical, social, and also environmental point of view.
Definitely a lot of exciting opportunities to tackle. It's even better when it's for such an important and good cause, right? Daniel, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much. And this is a topic that we'll definitely keep talking about as well. I am going to leave the final words with you. Anything you'd like to say, how your listeners can reach you or get to know your company, just be my guest. Thanks again, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. Please follow us on Irogo MENA on all channels, and we'll definitely love to connect and also learn more from you guys. So thank you again.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.